first question.
Yes.
What architecture qualifications did you gain and from which institutions?
Okay, well, the institution was University of Technology in Bratislava, and it was a faculty at that stage. Architecture was part of a building sciences faculty, where everyone was included, from quantity surveyors, geologists, structural engineers, architects. First 3 years where everyone had to do everything. So that means that even quantity surveyors had to do architectural project.
Good idea.
Very good. And we had to do everything else, like building sciences, maths, you name it. And then at the end of the third year, they picked those that showed some promise, because there would be 60 people out of 600 that were then selected to be architects. And it was so then there was 3 years of specialised study.
So when did you start this?
It was, I finished in '66, and so I would have started in 1960, I think, because it was 6 years. So.
Right. And you completed that?
Yes. See, there were two schools. One was the one which was part of the Slovak University of Technology, but then there was another course of architecture which was at the Academy of Arts, which was like a Beaux-Arts institute. And those architects, they didn't have any technical training, and they were usually doing, the arty things like exhibitions, and also, surprisingly, architects were doing stage design and also in films. They did the
So it was a bit like here, with the difference between QIT and the University of Queensland.
Yes, except that those from the academy, they were like painters or musicians, and considered that rather than technical people.
So they didn't have much experience when it came to employment.
No. And in those first 3 years, we also had many months of actual physical labour on building sites.
Ah.
So we started as labourers, and then in the third year we would be seconded, as assistant foremen on building sites.
So this was a government initiative to work on?
Yeah, everyone had to do that.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what sort of government did you have?
Well, it was the Communist Party. So, you had to start as a labourer. So it was 6 months of, pick and shovel.
And if you were one of the selected 10%, you went on to be an architect?
No, well, that was after 3 years. So everyone had to do the labour. And it was a good experience in a way, because we were exposed to building sites for something like 9 months, those first 3 years. And I had to work during the morning, and at 2 o'clock go to the uni, and from 2 to 7 lectures. So it was 12-hour days, 6 days a week.
So why did you choose architecture, or did they choose you?
Well, everyone wanted to be an architect mainly because it was a prestigious thing, you see. The architectural students were like the creme de la creme, and also because they had life drawing studios with nude models. So that was very popular too.
Yes, everywhere. So do you remember any of the staff, any of your teachers
Oh,
at
yeah.
that time?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk about them?
Yes, well, now, the professors, 3 of them were in the 60s then. So they were 19th century fellows, you know, they were born in 19th century. And they were the second tier of the avant-garde. So there was Professor Vladimir Karfik, and he's probably the only one in history of architecture that worked both for Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright. He spent a year in both studios because he was the chief architect for the Bata factory. Bata was a shoe manufacturer, and he was building new towns, not just factories. So he built the new town Zlin. Le Corbusier did the town plan for it. And Karfik was the chief architect, and that's Bata sent him to learn the ropes.
And what did he have to say about those experiences?
Well, the thing is that they were as quiet as anything. They didn't say anything at all because it wasn't good policy to advertise that you actually spent some time in the West or that you spoke foreign languages, anything of that. So he was pretty quiet. He survived the purges and everything of 1950s, unlike some of the professors who actually got jailed for subversive activities. Subversive activity could have been just because he had German name or spoke German. That was enough to go to jail. So Karfik was pretty quiet, and we found out what he did because by the time we were studying, there was a thaw in the communist rule, culminating in Dubček and the Prague Spring. So we were really interested in what these fellows were up to in 1920s and 30s. Even though they weren't talking about it, we found out. So that was him. The second one was Emil Belush, and he was sort of more of a classicist. He studied in Budapest during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now all of them were, like Karfik produced something like 600 buildings in his career. Belush not as many as that, but they were all incredibly prestigious. He also was the founder of the architecture school in Bratislava, and he designed the building where the architecture school is to this day.
So how big is Bratislava?
Oh, it was 300,000, now it would be probably a million. It was called Pressburg originally in German, or Pozsony in Hungarian. It was trilingual town, no longer of course, because it's 60 kilometers from Vienna down the Danube. So the influence was there, especially of Otto Wagner and all of those. So those were the 2 major professors, and then the third one was interesting, with whom then I finished the studies. I was in his studio. His name was Josef Kola, and he was during 1920s and 30s he was editor of the Avant-Garde Architecture magazine, and he organized lectures by all of the luminaries from Le Corbusier to Theo van Doesburg, from Destil and Bauhaus people and all that. He personally knew them.
So had any of them been trained at the Bauhaus?
No, because they were already practicing. They were contemporaries of, they were a little bit younger than Le Corbusier or Gropius. They were probably 10 to 15 years younger than them.
So what did you think of the curriculum? I mean, was it suitable?
Well, the curriculum was very was quite intense. See, all of these professors, they were running studios. So Karfik was industrial buildings, and office buildings. Belush was cultural buildings, and Kola was history of architecture and interiors. History of architecture was taught right through 6 years. Very detailed too.
Did they teach you modern architecture or
All of it. Yeah,
everything?
Everything.
They talk about core?
Yeah, no, not very much, you know, because I mean, you know,
It's dangerous.
well, no, but it just was, you know, it was just so much of it. So you know, he might get one lecture or half a lecture or something like that, and that'd be it. But you know, we started with Greek and what have you, and go right through.
So, but you came out of there with enough credentials to actually work in an office and design buildings or go into practice?
Oh yeah, well, the practice as such didn't exist in Czechoslovakia. You had to be part of the state-run office, like works department, right? And they did all of the projects, and then they were. You see, the architecture was practice of architecture was like this. There were architects that designed buildings, and it would be done up to 1 to 100 scale. And then the working drawings were done by the builders. And there might be architects working in the building offices, and they did everything from in 1 to 50 to detail. So I got the job in the 1 to 50 type of office, and so, which was pretty boring, but you know, you learned a bit. But we were doing competitions. Every afternoon we'd be working on competitions. And then in 1968, I was working with a friend of mine, and we won a national competition. We came second for a major office building.
But if it was just the government architect's office, who were you competing against?
It was open competition, and had we won, we would have been then employed by the state office, basically, that was running it.
So who were you employed by?
Well, I was employed by agricultural design, well, architecture. It was building office, right? We were doing agricultural buildings like sugar refineries, factories, you know, and then those kind of things. But the main focus was on the competitions.
And what were the competitions for? What type of build?
Well, they were. That one was for a major office building, which you know, was very detailed. It was for a big state-run mining firm.
And what sort of building was it? I mean, how many floors?
Oh, it was something like 20 or 15 floors tower, plus a very large podium, and we designed it as a Bürolandschaft, which was completely new to Czechoslovakia. The tower was naturally ventilated, sunscreen, you name it. I mean, it was all good stuff. You know? It was all suspended from the core by hangers, and you know, it was quite good. And the only reason we didn't win was that the jury thought that the roof would have been boring because we were too tired to draw the landscape, because it had a green roof. So it had all these things. We came second, so that was my major sort of coup.
So what year was this?
68.
Oh.
So when I ended up in Australia and showed that project, I got the job immediately.
So when did you come to Australia?
Well, what happened was that in 68, we just won that competition, and with 3 other friends, we decided one evening, let's go to Athens to the acoustics conference, Doxiadis, right? So, boom, off we went. One of the 3 friends, he was Canadian Slovak architect, and he was sort of discovering his roots, and he sort of was staying with us for a year. He had a car, so we just piled up in this VW bug and drove off to Athens.
May I ask, how did you find out about the acoustics conference?
Oh,
Was that information readily available?
Well, you see, 1968 was totally open. It was, everyone was, it was the best year that you can ever imagine. I mean, Czechoslovakia was to be this, communism with a human face. 1968, left-wing politics were all rife. Everyone was thinking, Czechoslovakia, that's how it's going to be. So anyway, so we got to Athens, and we become instant celebrities at this conference, rubbing shoulders with Buckminster Fuller and Margaret Mead and Sir Robert Matthews and people like that, speaking very little English. And we lived on the beach because we couldn't afford hotels or anything, so we were instant celebrities there. So what happened was that there was this Australian fellow whose name I forgot, and he was working at Doxiadis. And he threw a party for everyone, and we were there, and as we were drinking with him, he said, "Oh, when you're in Sydney, come and see me." And he gave me the address, 112 Harrington Street, Clark Gazzard Partners. And I thought, oh yeah, sure. Of course, I didn't know that by the time we got home, there would be invasion, and a month later I'd be out of the place, and I ended up in Sydney. So we arrived in Sydney, it was October 68, on Friday. Monday was a public holiday. Tuesday, we had to go to Chifley Square to register for dole because we were professional people, so we had to go to the Commonwealth office. So I had my gear with me. I was wearing my best suit. We finished our business and we thought, okay, well, now we just go and relax on the beach. We're walking past George Street. I look up, Harrington Street. All right, Harrington Street. Rings the bell. I look at the door. There is Clark Gazzard. So this is it. So I walked up, and George Clark, he was the town planner, he says, "What do you want here?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just looking for such and such." And he says, "Oh yeah, where did you meet him?" I said, "Oh, in Athens, at the acoustics conference." George went, So I showed him my work. He called in Don Gazzard, said, "Look at this." Showed it to Don, and Don said, "You start tomorrow." And so I started, and as it happened, at Clark, see, there were only 3 offices in Sydney that were any good. And that was, well, used to be the Opera House, but obviously by that time it was run by Peter Hall. So all of those people that used to work there, that were the brightest of them all, they were already in London or Japan or wherever. So then there was Clark Gazzard. Don Gazzard was ex-Harry Seidler.
Yes.
He never studied architecture. Harry employed him because he studied engineering, and he could do calculations for Harry. From there he went to London, where he worked for the Greater London Council in the project office.
Yes.
Right? He registered in England, automatically was registered in Australia, because once you're
Yes.
registered there, that was it.
Yeah.
And and so that's how he became an architect. And he was, so obviously Harry Seidler was the main thing. You know, like,
Well, what about Anchor Mortlock?
well, that was all sort of works department sort of thing. But all the bright young people were either at Clark Gazzard or at Harry Seidler's or at Cox Mackay. So those were the three, and I happened to be in Clark Gazzard. And as it happened, because Brisbane, all the young people from Brisbane, they would just go out. They landed either in Sydney or in London or wherever, but they never stayed here unless they had to work for the works department because they were indebted.
Well, it would work for Birrell.
Well, it might have worked for Birrell, but then they would all leave and go around the world, right?
Yeah.
And so, at Clark Gazzard, the two brightest fellows were, of course, Bruce Goodser, and there was Fred Van Os.
Ah.
Bruce was ex-Birrell, extremely talented, so I befriended him, and I befriended Fred, and Fred was the coolest thing you could ever imagine. So they were the two, right?
Yeah.
And that was my connection to Brisbane and everything else, including my wife, and all of my professional life started with that chance encounter in Athens.
So Fred had studied here, had he?
Yeah,
Huh.
he was ex-UQ.
Right. I didn't know him then, I only knew him in London.
Yeah, so that's how that was.
But in 1969, I was working for Clark Gazzard on the Gold Coast.
Yes,
At the
because
South
what happened then was, you see, the Clark Gazzard were expanding rapidly, and it was because of the town planning side of the business. They started what was called Urban Systems Corporation.
Yes.
We had a job in Western Australia working for Alan Bond, who incidentally never paid any fees. But nevertheless, it was planning a new town, right?
Yeah.
So they started an office, or they got together with a Perth office, and they amalgamated them in Urban Systems. Then George got the job somehow to do town plan for Gold Coast, right?
And Andy Stenders was doing it.
And Andy he had an office with a White Shoe Brigade architect, whom I can't remember who he was.
Ron Burling.
Ron Burling, that's right. And he was the arch, developer's architect.
Well, I'd worked for him first.
Yeah, that's
how
it.
I got
And
there.
Andy got there. And I remember Andy and Ron arrived in Sydney, bringing the goods. And Gaz was incredibly impressed. So he just embraced them, because what was happening in Sydney, Gazzard somehow, again through George Clark, got this mammoth job, which was Edgecliff Glebe redevelopment. And that was land all along Ocean Street and down Edgecliff Road, or the Edgecliff down Old South Head Road. That was all owned by Church of England. And they got this development consultant who said to them, well, let's redevelop the whole thing. So we started at the bottom of Edgecliff. There is one building and then the bus station. You see,
Yes.
there was Eastern Suburbs Railway,
Yes.
and so we were going to do this multi-story tower there on the corner, which never happened.
This is the corner of Ocean Street.
Yeah, Ocean Street and that. And then along Ocean Street, there was this massive residential development, towers, boom, 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 boom. They were round towers, which later on. And then Clark Gazzard also did, at the end of this site was Goodwin Village, which was retirement village. And John Mobbs, who then later on came to Gold Coast, he was doing all the site work for Clark Gazzard. You see, and we all worked on Goodwin Village. That was the drafting that. Bruce and me and several others. And that got built. Now the round towers with Fred Van Os, we spent months and months and months rejigging the plans and the mix of units and God knows what. And because they were round, they were impossible to plan. Nevertheless, we somehow managed to do it. And one day, a developer from Gold Coast arrived into the office, and I can see it like today. White shoes, gold chains, the whole disaster.
I know who you mean.
In he comes, Gaz charges out of his room, and he says, "Get the C2 drawings," which was the round tower. He says, "Cut off the title block and put this title block on." So we just put the title block in, and he brought it into the room, and he said, "I've got the project for you." Boom. And that was the centre point on the Gold Coast. It got built. Focal point.
Focal, yes.
Focal, that's
and,
it.
And the architect, I mean, the developer was Ferrer.
Ferrer,
Big,
that's right. Yeah. Ferrer. He was a builder
Ferrer, yeah.
and developer, yeah. And he built it. And that's when John Mobbs went up to the Gold Coast, and he stayed forever after.
He's always told me that an Italian designed that tower.
Yeah, Italian. Fred Van Os and me and everyone else in the office. It might have been said, "Oh, it's Italian" or whatever, but
he was Italian.
Yeah, but it was drawings with cut of title block and stuck on new title block. That's how that started.
Lou Ferrer.
Lou Ferrer, that's right.
Well, that was the best thing he ever did. He did some terrible things.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so that was that. And so then I went to London, where Gazzard gave me introduction to Shanklin Cox, because Oliver Cox and Graham Shanklin, they were ex-AA, and they were running an office, about 60 people, town planning and architecture. They did new towns. They did Cergy-Pontoise in France. They did a lot of work in the Middle East, which Fred Van Os was later on working on. I didn't work on those.
So when did you go there?
72.
Huh. And you were with Robin then?
No.
Huh.
I met her in London through Fred.
Huh.
Because she used to live in the shared house with Fred and other ex-Brisbane people in Balmain. That's where I met her first. And they were all the, there was Willie Young and, all of those people from the Architects' Reviews.
Huh.
They were all in Sydney by then.
Roger O'Sullivan?
Possibly, yes. But I don't know if he lived there in that house, probably not.
Well, he later lived on Scotland Island, where he did a house himself in the Pittwater.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was that connection. That's how I ended up then back in Brisbane in 1975.
Because of Robin? Or
Yeah.
because of Fred?
No, because of Robin. By that time we were together. And there in London, then I met through Robin Paul Memmott and Peter Bycroft, who were both active at the university here. Peter Bycroft then went on to other things, but of course Paul Memmott is still there.
Yeah.
and so we become good friends. And I've met, John Mainwaring through that. You know, that was all very tightly knit little group. So I thought Brisbane was pretty good because there were all these bright, all the best people in Sydney all came from Brisbane. You know, all the.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, the house where they lived in Balmain was something else. I mean, it was just fabulous. You know, I just thought, this is life. If Brisbane's like this, it can't be all that bad.
Well, it wasn't, was it?
Yeah. Anyway, and at Clark Gazzard, I also got the connection to Heathwood Cardilla Wilson, because Roger Heathwood worked with me at Clark Gazzard for a couple of years.
Yeah. So you came back to Australia when?
75, and we came to Sydney. There was no work whatsoever,
Yeah.
and I came here, and Clark Gazzard was down to one. It was Barry Ray who was
On the
in.
Gold Coast.
No, they were here in Brisbane by the time. Andy left. He went to teach at the QUT. And Barry Ray was the only one. He was originally from Perth, and he was a brilliant designer. And he had this project for Works Department, which was Cairns College of Advanced Education. It was a resource centre, library. And it was a beautiful design. It had a green wall, you know, like the sun protection was actually this trellis work all around, and it was to have these plants all around it. And when the Works Department saw that, they had kittens and they sacked us on the spot, you know, like, I mean, we completed the design development, and when they realised...
So you worked there?
Yeah, I worked on it.
Oh.
Because Barry was alone,
Yes.
and he met me at Carl Mehmet's place. Carl was engineer, twin brother of Paul,
Oh.
right? And he said, "Okay, come and work." So that was 76. We worked on that for about 6 months, and then one day, suddenly, Gazzard appeared. He opened the door, and he said, "Where is the red file?" Which was the client's file. He grabbed the red file and he said, "The office is closed." He just closed the Urban Systems Corporation just like that from one day to another.
Where was that office?
It was in Pharaoh's shopping centre in St. Lucia, upstairs, above the Chinese restaurant.
Had you designed that shopping? Had
No.
Gazzard's designed
No.
it? It would have been
No.
a shocker then.
Oh, it was built, it was there. You know, it's the one with the louvers, it's still there.
Okay.
As you go up the main drag,
Orchid
Orchid
Drive.
Drive, it's on the left.
Oh.
So anyway, Gaz closed the office, and that was it.
Did he say anything else? Did he say,
No, he just
"Sorry"?
said, "That's it, finished." And he went on to other things from there on. You know, he started small practice in Paddington, which became then Gazzard Sheldon, which is still running.
Mm.
And Don Gazzard is now in Melbourne, and you can find him on the internet. He has a website where he's publishing all sorts of interesting things about architecture. He's very active. He's 80-something now.
Well, last time I went to Sydney, I looked at that little church that he did.
Yeah, that was Rick Le Plastrier.
No. Out on the
Yeah,
eastern suburbs.
yeah. That church was it was Rick Le Plastrier. He was the project architect.
Very nice, but now not used.
Not used. No.
Looks like they're going to sell it.
Yeah. See, and so the Opera House crew, which was Rick Le Plastrier was one of them, Two of them came and worked for Clark Gazzard, town planners. It was Ian Breeden and Ron Devine. Ian was ex Harry Seidler, Bruce Ricard and all that, and Ron Devine also was of the Frank Lloyd Wright sort of organic architecture ilk. And they started this firm in Woolloomooloo because they had the redevelopment of entire Woolloomooloo. Sid Londish, the developer, had option on the entire Woolloomooloo. We did a scheme, and they called me to come in and give them a hand because I was the office building whiz kid, because that's what I ever did in Clark Gazzard. We were doing office building every day.
Did they get built?
Nah, Gaz it wasn't meant to be built because it was a property boom following the just like now, property boom on the tail of mining boom, right? And in those days you could just take option on the land, lodge development application and flog the lot with huge profit. So everyone was doing that, and Gazzard was just getting one after another. So I did about 5 or 6 office buildings in short succession. So these fellas, when they had 5 million square feet of office space to be built in Woolloomooloo, so they said, well, let's get him. So I got there, and they were ex Opera House. So Ian Breeden then went to London and what have you, but he came back.
So Harry Seidler would have built Australia Square by then.
Oh yeah, that was the main building in Sydney.
And that, as a round tower, I mean, that
Yeah.
was quite influential to
Absolutely.
Gazzard. I mean,
Yeah, that's why he wanted round towers, except they were residential. So if you had to shoehorn a square plan into a round thing, it wasn't easy.
And MLC hadn't begun, the MLC building that
No.
Seidler does next, which is sort of...
Now Harry was then not building much, I don't think. He did Australia Square. He did few of the smaller residential things at the Rushcutters Bay. No, what he was doing then was the embassy in Paris.
right.
That's what he was working on mainly. Yeah.
So, what caused you then to leave Sydney and all this activity?
Well, I wanted to go to London.
Again?
Well, that was
Oh,
it.
sorry,
72,
sorry,
you see.
72, yeah.
So I
And then
got.
after London you came to here.
I came here, yeah. And then in 75, apart from that Clark Gazzard episode, which was a few months, there was no work whatsoever. And then I got a job with Heathwood Cardilla Wilson, where they seconded me to the North Brisbane College of Advanced Education as Clerk of Works, so that the client was paying my wages and I was on site for 2 years. I was sitting there in the shed, smoking and counting the concrete trucks, taking notes of the registration numbers of every concrete truck, taking the delivery dockets, filing them away, doing the slump test on every 5th one. So it went. Anyway, it was good.
It was money.
It was money. I was employed, and also, I mean, the experience was pretty good because the foreman there was an old builder, so I was listening to what he had to say. He was an old. He wasn't saying much, but what he said was always.
Do you remember who he was?
No, I can't remember his name.
But it was being built by a private firm or by the...
Yeah, it was A.W. Edwards.
Ah. So, what happened after that?
Well, after that, I went back to Heathwood Car Dealer Wilson, and I spent the I was doing because they refused to use hydraulic consultants. They said that's an architect's job. So I was drawing mainly hydraulic drawings, sewage and plumbing on sepia prints, and it went on and on and on.
So who was working there?
Oh well, apart from Roger, there was Ken Downs was there. He was the. I mean, we didn't. You can imagine, Ken was really there because of sailing. Everyone sailed there, so it was my introduction to sailing mainly. And of course, Peter Heathwood, he was is a wonderful man, but he wasn't doing architecture then. He was doing town planning, which really meant going to courts and being a professional witness.
And sailing.
And sailing. So we were doing sort of works department work, through Fergus Wilson. So it was, as you can imagine, what in 1975 works department jobs were like.
Yep.
You know it all.
Yep. So
And then Bruce called me one day and he said, come and work there. And I said, no, finally. I'm in the office that actually is, that was the only office in Brisbane that was worth being in.
this is Gosseye Baker Wild.
Gosseye Baker Wild with Bruce Gosseye. Well, as you know, I mean, you worked there.
Yeah.
Rex worked there. Rex just then left for New Guinea. Shortly after I came there. Spence Jamieson was there. Gary, what was his name that ran the Jackson?
Carsley? No.
No.
It was Whitey.
There was White, Ian White, yeah. Two Ian Whites.
Two Ian Whites, yeah. Those two very different Ian Whites.
Yeah, but, and I think Don Watson used to work there too, didn't he?
He worked for Jeffrey Pye. He certainly didn't work there.
Maybe not, I don't know. Graham Davis,
Yes.
yeah. So there were all these people went through Bruce's mill.
Yeah.
Bruce was extremely intense.
Yes, and
He was running the office incredibly. I mean, every line had to be exactly as he intended it, and I mean, it showed.
I mean, not everyone could get on with Bruce.
No,
Um,
absolutely.
But if he had confidence in you, he just let you get on with it.
Oh yeah, but you had to do it in the proper way,
Yeah.
and it was really the highest quality work you can ever imagine.
Yeah, well, Rex did some wonderful stuff
Oh yeah,
there
oh yeah.
that I've seen. I don't know what else they were doing. Oh, the Gympie.
Yeah, the
Civic
Gympie
Centre.
Civic Centre,
Mm.
then the Rockhampton, the nursing home there, Sisters of Mercy it was, wasn't it?
I don't know that one.
Yeah. Ah, it was the cross plan, several stories, and Bruce just did these sort of amazing things like at the end of the cross, where the hands are, like this, where the fire escapes, and then he put on top of each fire escape red acrylic roof light, which was the stigmata, and sort of symbolism like this. It was.
Did he tell them that's what it was?
I don't know, but that's what it was. It was the cross. It was Jesus on the cross was the actual floor plan. Apart from that, it was very much,
So
Alvar Aalto sort of thing.
what year is this then?
78 maybe.
Because I came back to Australia in '78,
Yeah.
and there was no work in Brisbane,
No.
and I went to Sydney.
Yeah. Well, I was out of Heathwood, Cardigan Wilson to Goodsa Baker Wild. 6 months, perhaps. Bruce's father retired and Ken Baker retired. So it was just Bruce and Dudley.
Great combination.
Great combination. Now, Dudley, of course, as he was even then legend in his own lunchtime, right? And Bruce didn't get on all that well. And Dudley got a partner to come in, which was Peter Forrest. And Peter Forrest was he disbanded Forrest McMinn. They were really straight developers,
Yes.
boys. But Peter Forrest was actually a very competent architect. And I got on quite well with Peter Forrest, but Bruce couldn't stand him, so Bruce just simply bailed out and retired to Mount Nebo.
No, he did quite a lot of work in Mount Nebo.
Oh yeah.
How many houses do you think?
Well, I know he did his own house. Then there was, he did several others, but I know there was one that he built himself. It had a barrel vault. And when it was finished, the client came in and she said, "This is not what I wanted." So Bruce just bought the house from her. And that was it. He owned then 2 houses up there. There was another house which was built by B.T. Costello and Son, which was just father and son, 2 carpenters. And I got them to build our Baden house. Wonderful experience.
So when did you build the Baden house?
81. And I took time off work, and I just worked with them on the building site as a gopher. And virtually everything I know about detailing was simply observing these 2 carpenters. And that's, it was brilliant. I didn't do any details. They just kept building. And where there was something that I didn't like, I didn't get them to pull it down. I just incorporated it in some other way in the whole thing. And it worked really well.
So were they the builders who built Rex's house?
No, but they built the one on Mount Nebo for Bruce. That's how I got onto them. And when I finished the house, Robin was working on films in Sydney. So there was an advertisement with Hall, Bowen, Weber. It's Peter Hall, Peter Weber, the professor of architecture, and David Bauer. They had a firm in North Sydney. And they had this mammoth development on South Stradbroke Island. And I knew about this development because the developer came to see Peter Forrest. And Peter Forrest just laughed and just because the developer was so shonky that it just was beyond belief. So even Peter Forrest wouldn't have anything to do with it. Anyway, these fellows in Sydney, they embraced it greatly and they needed someone to work on it. So it was me. I got the job in Sydney, the Hall, Bowen, Weber.
Is this Peter Hall from the Opera House?
Yeah.
Oh,
So then, what happened though was obviously that this development never happened. So I worked with Peter Weber on the development of the Professional Development Centre at Mount Eliza. It was an extension to ANZIT's sort of an old building there. So it's at Mount Eliza. It's a school, private school for professional development. Big development it was. Residential and conference centre and all that. So I worked on that. And then I was the last person to work on the Opera House, because what happened for Peter Hall?
You finished it.
No, but what happened was that, as you know, the concert hall was originally meant to house the opera, right? And then it became concert hall. But then they couldn't stage the very large Italian operas in the opera house because it wasn't big enough for the orchestra and the huge choir that was required. So they were staging it in the concert hall, but there were no stage facilities. So they said, okay, well, let's alter the concert hall so that it becomes multi-functional thing with stage lifts and flying tower so that it can stage Nabucco and all these sort of operas. So that was all very well, but there was no as-built drawing. You see, Peter Hall had this room, and in the corner there was about 1.5 metre high pile of drawings, which was about 2 metres square, and that was the entire print of every drawing that was done on Opera House, including Utzon's drawings, right? So I had to go through that pile and find all the relevant drawings. Now, the overall plan was only done by students, 16th scale, and it was really crudely drawn. It was useless. It didn't even show what was actually built. It was only used as a reference for where the detailed drawings are. They only drew the interiors, right? So the shell was already in existence when they were doing this. So there were no drawings of that either in Hall's drawings. And then furthermore, all of their 1 to 50 or a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch scale drawings, there would be like 15 versions of it, A, B, C, D, E, F, like as it was issued. And sometimes the issue F was only for getting prices, and issue B actually was the one that was built, which was completely different. There was no record of it, what actually got built. So I got all of these drawings, including Utzon's drawings, and tried to figure out, because I had to draw the concrete, because otherwise, and the shell, because otherwise no one knew whether the flying tower would fit there or what have you. So I spent about 4 months researching all the drawings. I saw all of the Utzon's drawings, which were really of not much help, because they were like butter paper studies with no notes, no title blocks, nothing. They were just these brilliant drawings that the brilliant young men that worked there drew. They knew what it was, but they had no idea what actually it's depicting, because it didn't get built, you see. And the shell, I think, only existed in engineering drawings. I'm not sure that Utzon actually drew them, because all I could find was these studies for these wonderful timber mullions for the glass walls and such things. And then these works department style drawings that Peter Hall did. And I realised why it all happened that way, because like you look at what was built, right? So for example, the floor in the concert hall, so you look at it and it's this complex shape, but underneath the timber decking are 6x2 floor joists at 1'6" centres, bearers at 8' centres, and 9" by 9" brick piers that hold it.
Very, very domestic.
So it was documented so that anyone could tender on it, which is what the Works Department wanted. See, never mind that what's underneath. There were no special laminated timber things. Underneath are just house stumps, and that's how it got built.
So how long did this take you to do
Well,
as-built drawings?
It was several months, and I only did the concert hall, and it didn't go ahead, so I didn't progress past 1 to 100 drawings. But it was an incredible thing to ferret through these drawings, and I found these drawings where the draftsman would put little notes on the margin like "help," and it was sort of written there in .1 rapidograph on the very margin.
So be a nice thing to have on your drawing board, though, the concert hall.
So that was that. That was my 1981-82. And then I came back to Gosseye Wild with Peter Forrest. We did quite a few jobs, quite successful.
What jobs did you do?
We did, he got the job, for example, from Peter Hall, as it happened, because Peter Hall was running he was also a Commonwealth architect, you see. Oh, that was before I went to Sydney, that's right. We did the patrol boat base in Cairns for Commonwealth Works. That was pretty good, that job.
So the Stradbroke Island thing, did that turn out to be the resort that was done later?
I don't know.
Was it on the...
It didn't get done at all. I mean, we did some wild schemes for it from time to time at Peter Hall's, but nothing.
But Darryl Jackson did one
Yeah,
there
it could have
for
been.
Ron Clark, but it was on the inside near Sanctuary Cove, not the surf side.
Well, this was like the entire end of the South Stradbroke Island. It must have been also there near that cove, and you know, but it was big, huge.
Well, the Darryl Jackson one was pretty good,
Yeah.
and you know, it's all.
Well, Peter Hall's one would have been probably quite good. See, but Peter Hall was getting all these jobs. I mean, apart from that Mount Eliza thing, he got job to do architecture for huge power stations. So we did these enormous presentation drawings with letter-tone shadows. We were shaping power stations.
So-
Things like that. I mean, he had incredible connections, Peter Hall.
What did you think of him? I mean, he had a lot of criticism over his
yeah.
role in the opera
He
house
was.
because of Utsen's displacement. And,
Yeah, well, you see, Peter Hall was, and David Bowe, they were both sort of legends in their lunchtime as well. And you know, Peter Hall, he had an enormous amount of connections through the Works Department, both Commonwealth and State. You know,
but he was a good designer.
he was.
And did you ever go to his home or anything?
No. He was, you know, he was the kind of, there were quite a few of them at the works department at that time, in the 1960s, that weren't too bad, They were the sort of really hard-nosed, brutalist Sydney school. And,
So,
But the Sydney school was the thing, you see. They were all sort of grounded in that, The detailing was impeccable, and, they insisted on very fine, elegant solutions, if you like.
So there's a few questions I'll get back to on this
Yeah.
sheet that say, what do you consider to be the most important work you did, and why?
Well, until recently, I thought it was, working on the library here.
The State Library
Mm.
in Brisbane.
Yeah, mainly because, you see, Tim Hill, he sort of virtually single-handedly pushed it through to what it is now, against a lot of opposition, and he, his health must have taken enormous belting on that job. And it's a really significant thing for Brisbane, I think, that building.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in that it is an adaptive reuse of
Yes,
Robert
yes.
Gibson's building,
That's
and
right.
yet it's added a whole other dimension
Yeah.
about naturally ventilated open
Yeah.
space.
All of that was at the sort of larger scale, but you see, Tim managed to actually get the funding going for the fit out, because otherwise it wouldn't have worked.
And there's some pretty
And that-
interesting innovations there.
Mm.
That stained concrete in the green pattern.
Yeah.
How on earth did that happen?
I can't remember really. It just sort of, it probably happened mainly because of off-form concrete, you see. And the manufacturer of that stain, they just did what was really rectification of the magistrates' court. And I think the builder thought it was a good idea, Bovis. And maybe that's how it all sort of happened, because they thought that if you stain it, it's more forgiving to colour control.
But it wasn't straight staining, it was a whole artwork.
Oh yeah, of course.
So who actually did that?
Well, it was Tim and Lucas
Lear.
Lear.
We trained him.
Yeah, he was. They did
He was a machine.
the full layout of every patch of colour that went on that.
Well, it's fantastic. As a solution.
Yeah.
Well, we.
So that was like in Brisbane. That would have been the main thing. Working on the courts was pretty was a good thing too.
With architects.
With architects, yeah. But
But what about you? Also worked on that Anzac Square building for the Commonwealth. The tower on the corner of.
yeah, but what got built, it's nothing like what it was at that stage when I worked on it.
But it was a pretty big project.
It was,
Working on.
but that Anzac Square, well, I don't know how that historicist thing that's there happened, because I left. I wasn't there when they were doing it.
But you got known as the person who you went to, if you got a complex, big project, and you needed a good person to do the specs or to document it. I mean, you came to my office and did the law school.
Yeah. We did all
specs.
of those. Several
And-
things we did, didn't we?
And also the Maryborough City Hall.
Maryborough City Hall, yeah.
And maybe
But that was, see, shortly after that, I worked with Rex on his Tuggeranong
Oh, that's right, yeah.
project. You worked on his
Canberra.
on his residential ones.
Yeah.
I did one. I helped him on the second one. What is it called? You know, the second one he did.
Canberra was the first.
Canberra was first, and
Can't remember.
my daughter lived there, for goodness sake. Anyway, I worked on the second residential and then Tuggeranong. And I worked on it on and off until it started happening. And he called me when we did the working drawings. And I got Brian Donovan to give us a hand as well then. Because he didn't have any, he was starving. So I said, well, come and give us a hand. So we drew it up, Brian and me and a young fellow from, I can't remember his name, from Sydney, from Harry Sadler's office.
So that would have been after Brian had been over at Stradbroke for 6 months,
Yeah,
building Tim's
yeah.
tower.
No, he did a house there
Oh, yeah. That's right.
for McTaggart family,
Taggart, yeah.
which was quite a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But then he was starving, so he worked with us. I think we worked for 6 months on Tuggeranong.
Because he lived on a boat, didn't he, at some stage?
Yeah, he lived on the boat.
Cheap.
Yeah. And then, because Peter Roy worked with Rex before me, and he came in several times. He worked on the Spring Hill project
Oh, yes.
with the Rex.
Hill House.
And so when Peter became the architect in charge of what was then architectural design section of water supply and sewage department of the council, because they didn't know what to do with architects, so they put them on the they attached them to the sewage department. And Peter Roy reorganized the whole thing, and he got me to come in, and I worked through 1980s, 1990s there most of the time.
Huh? Peter Roy should be on our list, is he? Because he worked
Even-
for Gibson before that, didn't he?
Oh yeah, he did. He was the project architect on the
Performing
gallery,
arts.
on the gallery, and also on the performing arts. Or perhaps he wasn't project architect on the gallery, but
He was
I
on
know.
the concert hall.
Yeah, but I know that he did all the services coordination on the gallery, because that's his work, the perfectly lined up services in the car park.
Beautiful car park.
So yeah, so then he was getting to the council people from both from Rex's side and also from Gibson's.
Well, I had a little stint in there too.
Yeah, you did as well.
And then we got City
And
Hall.
Graham Davis. Yeah.
Which buildings constructed in Queensland between 1945 and 1975 do you consider significant?
Well, when I arrived, there was really nothing that sort of would strike you, except there were Birrell's buildings at the university, which was obviously something completely different. And then also obviously there was Robin Gibson's buildings at the uni. You know, main hall was probably the best of that lot. I don't think the cultural centre wasn't built yet in '75, so that was Robin Gibson's. Probably the main hall was the best. And then most importantly, of course, was John Andrews, the little chemistry building at the uni. John Simpson was
The project architect.
well, he was with John Andrews
Yes,
then,
yes.
and they did that. That was just completed, and then that was like, you know, because John Andrews was one of the main, you know, lights of the Australian architecture then, 1970s.
So he'd been in Canada, but he was Australian?
Yeah, and he did. So he must have come back, because he did the what was then the American Express building in Sydney,
Yes,
and then the office buildings in Canberra,
yes.
and this one here, and then I don't know what happened. He sort of disappeared from the scene.
Well, John Simpson stays on.
Yeah, and
Starts practice.
starts practicing. So those were the significant sort of large buildings, I suppose. And there were a lot of buildings that were done in 1950s by various architects that you sort of don't know much about, and they all have been demolished since or completely covered. And I don't know much about it, but
Carl Langer
yeah.
is one of those, and I mean his building.
Yes,
in
but there were
Springville-
other architects also, probably emigres, that worked in a very international style. You know, like there was a drive-in bank
Yes.
on the South Bank.
Yes.
There was an office building in the valley with sort of louver blades that got completely redone.
Can't think of that one. Where was it in the valley?
Oh well, as you go towards the hospital, you know, up that curve, it was on the right-hand side. It's a two-story building.
Abbotsford Road.
Well, as you're starting from the crossroads of St Paul's and Brunswick, and you sort of go towards the hospital, it was the first in the first block on the right.
Yes, yes. It was the Wonderlic building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And then there was the also it has been now completely altered. There was which is we did a bit of research on that at the council, because council owned it. It was the McPherson building
Yes.
in
down
Commercial Street,
Yeah, Commercial Road.
Commercial Road, and that was done by a Melbourne architect
Yeah.
who did a similar building in Melbourne and somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a bronze framed curtain wall, that glass wall. It's still there, but the rest has been altered significantly.
So buildings like the AMP building, when it happened, the first gold tower,
Yeah.
is that something you thought
Oh,
was appropriate?
I didn't take much notice of that. You know, I was sort of more in the John Andrews. To me, John Andrews was the closest, because it was off from concrete. It had the sort of sterling type glazing and all that. You know, I thought that was all pretty good.
And did you like what John Simpson did?
Yeah.
So, I mean, John Simpson did a building in Ipswich that I thought was quite interesting, the library up there.
No, I don't know that one.
And then the work on Expo, the piazza.
Oh yes, no, that was then later on, of course.
Yeah.
Blythe Waller. or Bly Robinson, Bly McCormick.
Yes.
There was Bly everything.
Yes. Well, you talked about a lot of people that you've worked with,
Yes.
the people who are significant that you worked with. I mean, have you mentioned them all? You mentioned Rex and
Oh well, Rex was Bruce Goodser, Rex Addison, and then of course Brian Donovan and Tim Hill, and then lately Richard Kirk. They're all very good people to work with, and you sort of and Bob Riddel too. It was pretty good working with you.
well, for short
We didn't do
periods.
much, but
Yeah, well, you were very necessary to get
Yeah.
those projects out and sort them out.
it was interesting working with John Hawkins too, at Architectus, and Greeley, John Greeley.
And did you ever work with John Mainwaring?
Never. No.
And not with, you worked with Roger Heathwood way back, but
Yeah.
not with his father.
No, well, it's his brother.
Sorry, his brother.
His brother. Yeah, I worked with them, and then later on I sort of almost joined them, but didn't quite do it. And anyway, it's all history now.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I like them very much as people, Roger and Peter, and of course Peter was like the pioneer of modern architecture in Brisbane, one of the pioneers.
Certainly.
I mean, his houses, we were sort of really looking at them as sort of examples how to do things. But he sort of, when I worked there, he never continued in that vein. He was totally focused on town planning, which I don't.
Well, did you ever go to his own house?
No, not the one that he built, because he moved from there by that time. He owned other places.
And the plywood house that he did way back,
Yeah, well, I mean,
it got moved but occupied now by his daughter.
I'm not sure.
It's out of the gap.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen that one, but I mean, they did that pavilion with Dalton, didn't they? Which was for Brett, and that building was there until recently.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Well, that was when they started the office with John Dalton.
Oh, well, didn't they win the competition
Yeah,
for that
yeah,
plywood
yeah.
house?
Well, I thought it was the building at the at Brett's, because it was kind of beautifully detailed in timber. It was much altered.
This is in Newmarket Road.
Yeah,
Fred?
but it got knocked down when the current development
Oh,
went
okay.
up.
Okay.
It was there like 15 years ago.
So,
You couldn't recognise it very much, except you could see the exposed timber frames.
so in terms of your own work, I mean,
Yeah.
you've designed a couple of houses that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
You want to talk about them?
Well, it's basically houses that we built with Robin. See, well, Robin, being an artist, she's she also, her background is, see, her father was building houses for them
And
throughout.
he was Dutch or not?
He was Dutch, yeah. So amongst other things, apart from being soldier and sailor and horseman, he was also a builder. And so there is a story where he built the house for them in 3 days.
Where?
At in the behind the rang somewhere on the farm, because they kept on moving, and it's a famous sort of thing. He just got a Quonset hut, and he put it there, put the partitions in it, boom, 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 built the house in 3 days, and they moved in because they had to move. So he had to build the house in 3 days. So she was exposed to thinking about houses from a very early age. She would have been a very good architect had she studied architecture, I think. So, we built our houses. They are very strong collaboration.
So this is Barden,
And
Outlook Crescent.
Outlook Crescent and at the lake.
And the
Yeah.
lake
Just the two of them.
Tharaba.
Yeah.
Have you designed anything else that you would put your name to?
Well, I did a few things at Gosseye World, but there's possibly, it didn't turn out usually the way you would sort of imagine, and actually the best projects didn't get built.
What were the best projects that didn't get
Well,
built?
we did a so we built actually nursing home, the base hospital in Maryborough, and another one base hospital in Nambour. So that was I designed it, except I didn't document it. See, and that was the problem. Because I designed it, and then I went to Sydney, and I came back when it was being built. And in the meantime, it got documented in the office without me. So, whilst the bones were there, but it didn't quite turn out exactly as I intended. Still, there were good nursing homes. They had some really new ways of doing things in them, which Dudley was very supportive of. Because Dudley, apart from being a legend, he also had deep knowledge of hospitals. And so we did that. And then we did quite a few projects for Gympie Hospital, Harvey Bay Hospital, and so on. And they were all naturally ventilated, naturally lit. We were doing all sorts of things like, that are coming now in the ESD.
They've been discovered.
They're being discovered. And they were all there, except that it didn't get built. Neither of those two. The Harvey Bay did get built, but not like the design.
When you were working for the council, you did
yeah.
quite a large building for
Yes.
buses on the busway, did you not?
Yeah. Okay, well, those were my designs. The bus depot at Garden City. I've forgotten about that. And then also, which is now altered, but it's a library at Chermside.
Okay.
So those, and then was the project architect at the powerhouse, but that's even
This
though
is the Powerhouse New Farm.
yeah,
Yeah.
new farm, but that was mainly Peter Roy as far as the leading force there, because he knew what it was all about. No one else had an idea, you see.
And who was Richard Allen was involved?
Richard was
Yeah.
involved in Cox Rayner, but
Right,
but neither of them had the theatre experience that Peter had,
yeah.
and he had a really hard time to achieve what was actually achieved, which means performing space that works brilliantly. And without architectural pretenses, you know, it was just a straight working space, because he was the only one that understood that you do magic with lights. Stage design, you don't do magic with things, pointy things that stick out of the walls.
But it's a fantastic result, and you know, at the end, he got no thanks. He got sacked because it
That's
went over
right.
budget.
Well, we all got sacked. I was the first one to go.
Well, I think just one more question to ask, and you may have already answered it, but which buildings in Queensland post 75 do you consider significant, either personally or generally?
Well, it was, you know, the Donovan Hill,
The library.
the library, because of its cultural significance.
Well, what do you think of Goma, for instance, which was being built at a similar time?
Well, you see, at that time there was. See, I worked since then. I worked with the Lindsay Clare in Sydney, and with the people that did Goma, so I understood a lot better how it came about, and so I have great respect for them, and I think it's a pretty good building, even though, you know, at the time they were sort of seen as completely diametrically opposed to the Donovan Hill world.
But I think that's a good thing, isn't it? That we have
It was a good thing.
two
Yeah.
things. I mean,
And I've seen, you know, having seen, having been exposed to both offices, I can appreciate how Lindsay and Kerry work, which is quite an incredible way of working, you know. I mean, like Kerry, she's amazing. She just so thorough and competent.
well, people say that about you too.
Well, she's something else, and she manages to even cook the dinners and lunches, and look after how many children they had. I really can't. That's
4 or 5, I forget.
It's just beyond me. It's beyond me that she's an absolute superwoman.
Yes. Well, thank you. That's
All right.
fantastic.
Thanks.